What happens when a king finally decides he's had enough? No, seriously, pause for a second and think about that question. Because this isn't the story of a celebrity feud. This isn't a tabloid headline that burns bright for a day and disappears the next. This is a king, a monarch, the head of one of the oldest institutions on earth. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And after 5 long, silent, politically dangerous years, he has finally chosen to strike back. Let me ask you, did you ever imagine that one day King Charles would take Meghan Markle and Oprah Winfrey into a courtroom? Not metaphorically, not symbolically, not through palace aides, sources, or carefully worded press releases, but through a real lawsuit. Filed, stamped, delivered, signed under royal authority. Why now? Why after half a decade of explosive fallout, global polarization, royal family fractures, media wars, Netflix contracts, podcasts, documentaries, paparazzi battles, and endless speculation? Why did Charles finally decide to unleash the legal weapon he had kept holstered for so long? Maybe the better question is, what changed? You probably remember where you were when you first saw that Oprah interview in 2021. Maybe you watched it live. Maybe you saw the clips echoed across social media, playing in an endless loop. Meghan's allegations, Harry's reactions, Oprah's shock, the "were you silent or silenced?" line that practically broke the internet. For millions, it was a cultural earthquake. For the monarchy, it was an existential threat. For Charles, it was a wound that never truly healed. The accusations were not small. They weren't light. They weren't things you forget. They were statements that carry weight. Heavy, global, historical weight. Statements that could follow a man for the rest of his life. Statements that could fracture a family, shift public opinion, and tarnish reputations in ways no PR campaign could ever undo. And yet, for 5 whole years, Charles stayed silent. The world called it dignity. Critics called it weakness. Supporters called it strategy. Enemies called it guilt. But what if none of those explanations were true? What if Charles wasn't staying silent out of restraint or dignity? What if he wasn't staying silent because he couldn't respond? What if he was staying silent because he was gathering something far more powerful? Evidence. Let that sink in. Because the lawsuit he has now filed, finally, decisively, contains details that didn't exist back in 2021. Documents that hadn't yet surfaced. Conversations that hadn't yet been leaked. Witnesses who hadn't yet stepped forward. And messages, yes, messages, that even Meghan Markle never expected to see daylight. And here's the twist nobody expected. Oprah is named. That's right, the media titan, one of the most influential interviewers in modern history. A woman viewed as a pillar of integrity, empathy, and journalistic power. The lawsuit doesn't merely mention her. It ties her to key decisions made before, during, and after the interview that the king's legal team argues materially shaped the defamatory impact of Meghan's statements. Think about how seismic that is. Oprah, the interviewer, now part of a lawsuit that challenges not only Meghan's claims, but the structure, context, and editorial framing of the most-watched celebrity interview of the decade. And you know what the real bombshell is? This isn't just about what Meghan said. It's also about what Oprah didn't say, what she didn't clarify, what she didn't challenge, what she allowed to remain ambiguous. You feel that tension rising? Good. Because it's exactly what viewers will feel when watching this 1-hour expose. Layered, contradictory, emotional, unpredictable. Let's go deeper. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for public opinion to shift. Long enough for insiders to come forward. Long enough for friendships to fracture, alliances to crumble, contracts to end, and truths to unravel. Look at the timeline. Look at the moves. Look at the sudden silences that weren't there before. Netflix cooled down. Spotify ended. The Archetypes podcast collapsed. The Hollywood buzz faded. The Sussex popularity dipped. And behind palace walls, something else was happening. Something no one outside the monarchy saw coming. Slowly, piece by piece, quietly and methodically, evidence was accumulating. Former palace aides writing memoirs. Production crew members reaching out anonymously. Legal experts analyzing inconsistencies. Journalists uncovering contradictions. International lawyers tracking cross-border defamation nuances. And then came the first crack. A witness. A witness who had never spoken publicly before. A witness with access. A witness who saw things, heard things, and had kept them buried until now. And what they revealed was enough to change everything. But pause for a moment. Let's not rush to the witness yet. Let's focus on the simple, undeniable truth that underpins this entire video. Charles did not file this lawsuit impulsively. He filed it with calculation, with strategy, with timing. 5 years isn't hesitation. 5 years is preparation. What does preparation mean in a legal context? It means research, documentation, verification, fact-checking, legal opinions from multiple jurisdictions, evaluating treaties, protocols, reputational damage, media reach, financial impact, international precedent, political consequences. A king does not file a lawsuit against an American icon lightly, nor against a daughter-in-law whose allegations ignited a global debate, nor against a media machine so powerful it could drown the monarchy in headlines. So why now? Because something surfaced that made waiting impossible. Something that forced Charles to say, enough. And that's where the emotional pulse of this story lies. Not just in the legal drama, not just in the media spectacle, but in the personal fracture. The father-son estrangement, the generational tension between tradition and rebellion, the humiliation of seeing one's parenting, one's legacy, one's dignity shredded on the world stage. Have you ever had someone accuse you of something so harmful, so damaging, so morally heavy, and you were told to remain silent? Imagine that. Imagine being told, don't respond, don't defend yourself, don't escalate, don't worsen the PR disaster. Just let the world believe what it wants. How long could you hold that in? A month? A year? 5 years? And then imagine being a king, someone with a historic duty not just to your family, but to an entire nation. At what point does silence stop being dignified and start being dangerous? You see, this isn't just about Meghan Markle. This isn't just about Oprah. This is about the future of the monarchy itself. A monarchy facing modern scrutiny, modern media, and modern misinformation. It's about reputation, legacy, power, truth. And how one interview, just one, nearly brought all of that crashing down. But here's the twist you didn't expect. The lawsuit is not simply about disproving allegations. It's about exposing the process, the coordination, the discussions, the planning that happened before the cameras ever started rolling. Because what the lawsuit hints at, between the lines, behind the redactions, hidden inside the footnotes, is that the Oprah interview wasn't just a spontaneous conversation. It was curated, structured, strategized, shaped with intent. And if that is true, if the narrative was crafted in ways the world didn't know, then the entire foundation of the controversy shifts. Suddenly, this isn't just a family dispute. It becomes a case study in media manipulation, celebrity influence, and political theater. So ask yourself, what did Oprah know? What did she assume? What did she choose not to question? What did she not verify? And more importantly, who else was involved? Because if Charles's lawsuit is correct, there was a third player, someone Meghan trusted, someone who helped guide the messaging, someone who has not yet been publicly named. And that person's role changes the story completely. But we're not there yet. Right now, we are standing at the edge of something far more explosive. The moment King Charles signed the legal document. Imagine that scene. The quiet room, the heavy stillness, the weight of history in the air. Legal advisors sitting across from him, papers spread across the table. One signature, one pen stroke, one decision that would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Hollywood, and every newsroom across the globe. And what makes that moment even more astonishing? Inside those lawsuit documents, buried deep within, was something no one expected. Not journalists, not royal watchers, not Hollywood insiders, not even Meghan. A detail so startling, so revealing, so legally explosive, that once it comes out, the Oprah interview will never be seen the same way again. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The lawsuit heard around the world. Why now? What makes a king finally pull the trigger? That's the question I want you to hold in your mind as we dive into this chapter. Because the answer is far more complicated, far more strategic, and far more explosive than most people realize. Not everything is what it seems. Not every silence is weakness. And not every delay is indecision. Sometimes a delay is the weapon. And in the case of King Charles, that delay lasted exactly 5 years. Let me open with a simple but provocative line. A monarchy does not sue lightly. A king does not accuse without certainty. And a father does not strike unless he believes he has no other choice. So why now? Why this moment? Why this year? Why after all the noise from 2021 to 2025? Documentaries, podcasts, public statements, Hollywood narratives, award shows, royal biographies, Netflix deals, Spotify implosions. Did the king suddenly choose to unleash a legal avalanche? Why did the world wake up to learn that Charles had filed a defamation lawsuit aimed at Meghan Markle and the legendary Oprah Winfrey? Ask yourself, what changed? Because something did. Something significant. And that something is the reason this chapter exists. Let's start with a detail most people overlook. In 2021, when the Oprah interview aired, King Charles wasn't just a father. He wasn't just a public figure. He wasn't even the monarch yet. He was the Prince of Wales, an heir, bound by protocol, bound by his mother's leadership, bound by the constraints of royal PR strategy designed to preserve stability at all costs. But then everything changed. Elizabeth II died. Charles became king. And with that transformation came a shift that most people underestimated. The monarch no longer absorbs punches. He defends the institution. The moment Charles ascended the throne, every accusation made in the Oprah interview no longer targeted Prince Charles, the father. They targeted Charles III, the King of the United Kingdom, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, and the living symbol of Britain's constitutional monarchy. That shift alone changed the game. But was that the only reason for the lawsuit? Not even close. Let me walk you through the build-up. For years, Charles swallowed the accusations. In silence, in frustration, under pressure from advisors who insisted, do not respond, do not fuel the fire, do not escalate this into an international family war. And for a while, that strategy worked. Public opinion was divided, yes, but not entirely against him. Then something happened. Piece by piece, the Oprah narrative began to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that made headlines. It cracked quietly, through inconsistencies, through contradictions, through statements Harry and Meghan gave later, statements that didn't match the original claims, through documentaries that omitted key details, through Netflix specials that revised earlier stories, through memoirs that contradicted earlier interviews. Have you ever watched a puzzle fall apart? Not all at once, but slowly? Where one piece stops fitting, then another, then another. This was that puzzle. Let's explore the turning points one by one. Turning point number 1, the birthright question. You remember the most explosive allegation from the Oprah interview, that a senior royal, later assumed by millions to be Charles, had expressed a racist concern about the skin tone of Meghan and Harry's unborn child. A statement that shook the world. A statement that triggered outrage. Media storms. Political responses. International debates. But by late 2024, cracks appeared. Harry himself, during the promotional tour for his memoir, made a comment that subtly contradicted the original framing. Suddenly, the conversation was not how it first appeared. Suddenly, the meaning shifted. Suddenly, the timeline blurred. And Charles's legal advisors noticed. Turning point number 2, the royal correspondence leak. This is the part the public knows very little about. Because in early 2025, internal palace correspondence, letters, emails, memos, written years prior were quietly leaked. Not to tabloids, not to social media, but to legal experts and discreet journalists known for verifying accuracy. The correspondence didn't just defend Charles. It dismantled key parts of Meghan's claims. Turning point number 3, the unedited footage inquiry. This is where Oprah enters the story. Because as the lawsuit outlines, the palace began quietly requesting unedited interview footage. Something internationally recognized as a standard verification step in high-profile defamation cases. And do you know what happened? The request wasn't denied. It was ignored. Ignored for months. Ignored repeatedly. That silence raised red flags. Turning point number 4, internal testimony. Now we arrive at the biggest shift before the lawsuit. A witness came forward. Not a random figure. Not a disgruntled staff member. Not an anonymous source. Someone who was present during the pre-interview discussions. Someone who overheard conversations. Someone who had the receipts. Someone who had nothing to gain, except clearing their conscience. This witness provided messages, call logs, notes from pre-production meetings, direct quotes about what would and would not be included, details of coordinated narratives, and the kicker, information suggesting that certain topics were framed in ways that implied guilt without direct evidence. Do you understand how monumental that is? This wasn't about an allegation. This was about the architecture of the entire interview. And that architecture had weaknesses. Turning point number 5, the institutional threat. By mid-2025, something became increasingly clear. The Oprah interview wasn't just a family drama anymore. It was influencing political discourse. It was resurfacing during debates about monarchy reform. It was impacting public trust surveys. It was cited during parliamentary discussions. Think about the implications. An interview from 2021 was affecting constitutional debates in 2025. That meant the monarchy itself was at risk. A king can ignore personal attacks. He cannot ignore institutional threats. Turning point number 6, global media shift. For 5 years, Meghan and Harry dominated headlines with their narrative. But by 2025, the tide changed. Journalists who had previously supported the Oprah narrative began questioning inconsistencies. Media outlets that had championed the interview's authenticity started revisiting the facts. The public wasn't polarized anymore. It was confused. And confusion is dangerous for any monarchy. Turning point number 7, the health factor. This one is delicate, but essential. During 2023 to 2024, Charles experienced health issues. And while he recovered well, the palace used that period to reconsider long-term legacy planning. A monarch must care about the world he leaves behind, not just the world he lives in. If Charles allowed those Oprah accusations to stand unchallenged, they wouldn't just stain his reign. They would stain the crown for generations. Turning point number 8, the final spark. Every story has its moment. The moment the dam breaks. The moment the pressure becomes unbearable. In this case, the spark was a document. A document delivered discreetly to the palace, so quietly that even Meghan, Oprah, and their teams had no idea it existed. This document contained verbatim transcripts, specific wording choices, altered segments, and timelines that did not match the broadcast version. It was the smoking gun. And that was when Charles finally realized. He wasn't fighting opinions. He wasn't fighting emotions. He wasn't fighting stories. He was fighting misinformation that had become accepted as truth. Do you understand how dangerous that is for a monarch? If misinformation becomes accepted truth, then truth becomes optional. And for a monarchy, an institution built on stability, tradition, and the public's trust, optional truth is fatal. So the king made his choice. The lawsuit wasn't launched because Charles was angry. It wasn't launched because he felt insulted. It wasn't launched because of family drama. It was launched because of 3 things: legal certainty, institutional protection, documented proof. And that is the part the world underestimated. Because once you see the entire timeline, once you connect the patterns, once you examine the evidence, you realize something incredible. The lawsuit didn't happen now. It started 5 years ago, and the world is only seeing the final act. But as explosive as all these turning points are, none of them compare to what came next. Because after those 5 years of silence, frustration, and quiet intelligence gathering, something unexpected happened. Something Charles didn't anticipate. Something that changed the trajectory of the entire case. And it began with a single sentence spoken by a single witness. A sentence that didn't just challenge Meghan's narrative. It challenged Oprah's. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The secret witness who triggered everything. What if I told you that everything you think you know about the Oprah interview, every headline, every quote, every outraged reaction, hinges on one person you've never heard of? A single witness. A single voice. Someone who was never meant to speak. Someone who was supposed to stay invisible, silent, forgettable. But silence has a breaking point. And this witness hit theirs. Let me start with a question that will frame this entire chapter. What happens when the one person who knows the truth, the real truth, finally steps out from the shadows? Because that's exactly what happened. This witness didn't appear on television. They didn't publish a book. They didn't leak things to tabloids. They weren't seeking fame, money, attention, or revenge. In fact, the The first words they reportedly said to the king's legal team were, "I don't want anything from this. I just can't watch the lies anymore." Think about that. Think about what would drive someone to step into the crossfire between the British monarchy, Hollywood, an international celebrity couple, and Oprah Winfrey herself, one of the most powerful women in media. Courage? Maybe. Guilt? Possibly. A desire to clear their conscience? Almost certainly. But what exactly did they know? And how did their testimony turn a dormant royal scandal into the lawsuit heard across the world? Let's rewind. This person wasn't a palace employee. They weren't a royal aide. They weren't part of Meghan's personal staff. This was a witness to the construction of the interview. And construction is everything. Because when you build a narrative brick by brick, layer by layer, cut by cut, you also build the consequences. So let's talk about how this witness came forward. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic confession. There was no dramatic confrontation, no spotlight, no dramatic palace meeting. It began with a single message. A short one, sent quietly, cautiously, to a legal representative connected to the king. "I have information relevant to the Oprah interview," it said. "It's about what really happened behind the scenes." Imagine being the person receiving that message. Imagine knowing the potential implications. Imagine the pressure not to make a mistake. A vetting process began immediately, quietly, discreetly, without a leak, without a whisper. Meetings were arranged. Background checks were conducted. Digital footprints were assessed. Credentials verified. And during the first formal conversation, the witness revealed something that made the legal team sit up straighter. "I was present for the pre-production discussions." Those 8 words changed everything. Because pre-production discussions are where narratives are born. It's where interview subjects express what they're comfortable talking about. It's where producers decide what to highlight. It's where tone is established. It's where storylines are shaped. This witness didn't just attend those meetings. They documented parts of them. They had notes, emails, timestamps, observations, draft outlines of the interview, comments made by Meghan, comments made by people representing Oprah, moments of hesitation, moments of enthusiasm, moments of deliberate shaping. They also had something else. Contradictions. Contradictions between what Meghan said privately and what she later said publicly. Contradictions between what Oprah's team agreed to ask and what Oprah ultimately emphasized. Contradictions between what Harry corrected off camera and what he allowed to remain uncorrected on camera. Imagine reading those contradictions for the first time. Imagine realizing that the interview millions believed to be raw and unfiltered was something else entirely. Was it a lie? Was it a misunderstanding? Was it a curated emotional narrative? Those questions alone justified a deeper investigation. Now let's talk specifics. Because you deserve the details. According to the witness, there were 3 categories of behind-the-scenes information that changed everything. The witness had notes showing that certain events Meghan referenced in the interview did not match the actual timeline. Dates were shifted. Contexts were blurred. Incidents were combined. These may seem like minor discrepancies, but in defamation, a single day can change everything. The witness claimed Meghan explicitly clarified certain comments off camera, clarifications that would have changed public perception entirely. These clarifications never aired. Worse, according to the witness, they were not even mentioned. They were left out. And what happens when you remove context from a statement? You make that statement sharper, more damaging, more dramatic, more emotionally loaded. This is where Oprah's involvement becomes impossible to ignore. The witness described discussions where certain clips were favored because they created impact, where pauses were extended, where reactions were sharpened, where Oprah's expressions, shock, disbelief, concern, were strategically chosen for maximum emotional effect. Oprah's style is powerful. That's no secret. It's why she's one of the greatest interviewers of all time. But when that style intersects with allegations against a head of state, the stakes change. Combine those categories, and you get what the king's lawyers call material shaping of defamatory implications. And that's what made this witness so dangerous. But here's where the story gets even more intense. The witness didn't come forward because they wanted to attack Meghan. They didn't come forward because they wanted to sabotage Oprah. They didn't come forward because of palace loyalty. This person had zero connection to Buckingham Palace. They came forward because they witnessed something in 2025 that shook them, something that made them think. This has gone too far. What was it? not an article, not a documentary, not a rumor. It was the increasing political weaponization of the Oprah interview. The accusations were resurfacing in public debates, policy discussions, and academic forums. It stopped being a celebrity moment. It started becoming historical record. And that terrified the witness. Because they knew the foundation of that record wasn't solid. It was shaped, edited, distorted through omission. So they stepped forward. They provided access to their files. They lended credibility through sworn statements. They offered testimony under confidentiality agreements. They allowed lawyers to examine their digital records. And that's when the palace realized something astounding. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't speculation. This was evidence. Evidence that changed the entire landscape. Evidence that proved the Oprah interview was not the spontaneous revelation it appeared to be. Evidence that indicated certain narratives had been refined, rehearsed, and reinforced. Evidence that showed who influenced what. And evidence that implicated someone the public would never suspect. Because according to the witness, Oprah wasn't the only media figure consulted before the interview. There was a third player, a strategist, a narrative architect, a person whose involvement had been kept entirely hidden from the public. And once the palace discovered that name, the lawsuit became inevitable. But as explosive as this revelation is, it's nothing compared to what the witness handed over next. Because buried deep in their files, in a folder they thought they deleted, was a document that would set the entire legal case on fire. A document that contradicted one of the most emotionally charged claims Meghan made. A document that Oprah's team never expected anyone outside the production to see. A document that, once revealed, changes the meaning of the interview forever. But that document is only the beginning. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the most explosive interview of the decade, the one watched by hundreds of millions, the one that sparked global outrage, the one that rewired the public's understanding of the royal family, wasn't as unfiltered, raw, or spontaneous as we were told? What if Oprah Winfrey, the queen of authentic, emotion-driven storytelling, had been part of something different? Not a conspiracy, not a fabrication, but a carefully guided moment where certain truths were elevated, certain clarifications were quieted, and certain narratives were allowed to bloom without challenge. What if the interview wasn't just a conversation, but a construction? Let that question sit with you. Because this chapter is where the comfortable narrative dies. This is where we peel back the layers. The production decisions, the editorial instincts, the off-camera conversations, and uncover the role Oprah played in shaping the most controversial royal story of the century. And before we go forward, let me be clear. This isn't about blaming Oprah. It's about understanding how her influence, her style, her authority, and her choices contributed to shaping a narrative with world-shaking implications. Let's dive in. Before the cameras rolled, before Meghan sat down on that patio chair, before the world leaned in waiting for bombshells, there were meetings. You already know this from the witness in Chapter 2. But what you don't know is what happened in those meetings. Imagine a quiet room. Producers sitting with laptops. Assistants with clipboards. Oprah's senior production team mapping out angles, transitions, emotional arcs. And in that room, according to the witness, 3 recurring themes emerged. Which questions would deliver emotional impact? Which topics should remain ambiguous? Which moments should allow Meghan's statements to speak for themselves? Without interruption, without pushback, without clarification. That last one is key. Oprah is known for asking difficult questions. She's known for the raised eyebrow, the shocked silence, the what. She's known for pressing gently but firmly. But in this interview, there were moments she didn't press. Moments where her silence amplified the allegation rather than illuminate the truth. And if you think silence is neutral, think again. Silence is powerful. Silence can validate. Silence can intensify. Silence can create meaning where none existed before. So why did Oprah stay silent at certain moments? Let's explore. The witness reported pre-interview discussions where Meghan expressed concerns about how some topics would be received. She wanted space. She wanted emotional cushioning. She wanted Oprah's reactions to reflect empathy, not skepticism. And Oprah agreed. Not because she wanted to manipulate anything, but because Oprah's brand is empathy. But empathy in a highly emotional, highly political interview? Empathy in a conversation with massive global stakes? Empathy in a setting where allegations were not just personal, but institutional? That changes everything. Now let's talk about what Oprah knew before the interview. The witness revealed something extraordinary. Oprah's team received briefing notes. Not from Buckingham Palace. Not from the royal family. From Meghan's side. These notes included sensitive topics, emotional triggers, boundaries, requests for how certain questions should be phrased, and areas where Meghan wanted Oprah to lean in, meaning reinforce the emotional weight of the moment. Were these standard? Sometimes. Celebrities often request interview boundaries. But here's where it becomes unusual. The notes weren't just boundaries. They were narrative cues. And Oprah followed them. Let me be clear. This doesn't mean Oprah was complicit in deception. It means Oprah trusted Meghan's version of events. Trusted that the emotional truth was sufficient justification for the framing. But emotional truth is not legal truth. It is not factual truth. It is not historical truth. And in a defamation lawsuit, only factual truth matters. Let's go deeper into specifics. The witness provided the king's lawyers with a list of moments Oprah reacted to in ways that were not spontaneous. Reactions that were rehearsed. This is shocking, but not unheard of in high-profile television. Producers will sometimes say, when she reveals X, give a beat. Let the silence speak. Let the viewer fill in the emotion. In normal Hollywood interviews, this is harmless storytelling technique. But in an interview accusing an institution and a king of racism, cruelty, and indifference, it becomes something else. Let's break down 3 major Oprah reactions and what they meant. The famous what? When Meghan mentioned the alleged skin tone conversation, Oprah leaned forward, eyes wide, whispered, "What? Powerful, iconic," and, according to the witness, discussed beforehand. Not the exact moment, but the production's desire for Oprah's reaction to elevate the emotional gravity of the claim. Reaction number 2, the pause. The long, drawn-out silence after certain allegations was not accidental. It was intentional. Silence amplifies. Silence suggests seriousness. Silence tells the viewer, this is big. Reaction number 3, the echo. Oprah repeated certain phrases Meghan said, not to clarify, but to reinforce them. This psychologically signals to an audience. This is credible. Now, here's a detail that changes everything. During pre-interview discussions, Meghan made several clarifications about incidents she later described on camera. These clarifications were nuanced, conditional, less absolute, less damaging, more balanced. None of these clarifications aired. According to the witness, Oprah was aware of some of these clarifications before filming, but she did not mention them. Why? Because raw emotion is more compelling than nuance. Raw emotion trends. Raw emotion creates cultural moments. Raw emotion defines interviews. And Oprah is a master of raw emotion. But here's where the problem begins. When raw emotion intersects with allegations of wrongdoing, the line between storytelling and defamation becomes razor thin. And Oprah, knowingly or unknowingly, walked that line. Let's talk about the editorial process. This is where the lawsuit becomes dangerous. During editing, segments were moved around. Some were shortened. Some were extended. Some were removed entirely. One removed segment, according to the witness, included a crucial correction Meghan made about an early timeline. That correction would have softened the allegation. It would have reduced its perceived severity. It was cut. Do you see the pattern? Not fabrication, not invention, but framing. Framing that changed the meaning. Framing that intensified the narrative. Framing that created emotional certainty where factual uncertainty existed. And that framing is what Charles is now legally challenging. But what's even more shocking? Oprah herself didn't expect the interview to be used the way it was used. She expected backlash. She expected controversy. She expected noise. But she didn't expect her interview to be weaponized politically. She didn't expect her reactions to become historical artifacts. She didn't expect a defamation lawsuit naming her as a facilitating party. She didn't expect the interview to become evidence, not of wrongdoing by the monarchy, but of editorial malpractice. Yet here we are, and we haven't even touched the biggest bombshell. The lawsuit alleges that Oprah had knowledge of certain off-camera clarifications that contradicted the emotional impression created on camera. And that means one thing. Oprah may be asked to testify. Do you understand the magnitude of that? Oprah Winfrey, the most influential interviewer of the modern era, being questioned in a courtroom about her decisions, her framing, her editing, and her role in amplifying allegations against the king. This is unprecedented, historic, unimaginable, and yet completely real. But here's the twist that takes this to another level. The witness revealed that Oprah received messages from a third party, someone advising Meghan on how to structure the narrative, a strategist, a messaging architect, someone Oprah trusted. And this third party was far more involved than anyone knew. Their advice shaped the interview. Their suggestions influenced Oprah's approach. Their input guided the emotional pacing. And once their name surfaced, the palace realized the interview wasn't just an interview. It was a coordinated messaging event. And that changed everything. But nothing compares to the revelation that came next. Because buried inside the files the witness handed over, hidden in a folder long assumed deleted, was a transcript of a pre-interview exchange between Oprah's team and this third strategist. A transcript that contradicts one of the core allegations Meghan made. A transcript that Oprah never expected anyone to see. A transcript that rewrites the meaning of the interview. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Let's start with a question that hits right at the core of what you're about to hear. If a king files a lawsuit and redacts a portion of it, what on earth is powerful enough, dangerous enough, and explosive enough that even a monarch refuses to make it public? Because that's exactly what happened. When King Charles filed his defamation lawsuit, legal analysts, journalists, media outlets, and even former palace insiders combed through the documents line by line. Every sentence mattered. Every timestamp mattered. Every allegation mattered. But what grabbed the world's attention was not what was included. It was what was hidden. A thick black redaction. A section entirely concealed from public view. A part of the lawsuit so sensitive it was legally locked away. And the question on everyone's mind was simple. What was under those black bars? You're about to find out. Let's ease into this with the tension it deserves. Because in the world of legal filings, redactions are rare. Redactions in a lawsuit filed by a reigning monarch? Almost unheard of. Redactions signal one thing. Danger. Danger to reputations. Danger to negotiations. Danger to ongoing investigations. Danger to political relationships. Danger to individuals whose names, roles, or actions could ignite global controversy if revealed too soon. So ask yourself, what danger was so great that Charles himself decided the world wasn't ready to see it? Let's break this down. The redacted section wasn't at the beginning or the end of the lawsuit. It was buried deep inside, right in the center of a paragraph referencing supplementary evidence provided under sealed declaration by witness identifier C17. C17. That was the witness from Chapter 2. The one who came forward unexpectedly. The one with notes, messages, timelines, and receipts. The one who knew what the cameras didn't capture. The one who understood how the interview was built, not just recorded. So what exactly did C17 provide that had to be hidden from the world? Let's reconstruct the moment the palace legal team opened that sealed document. Imagine the room. Thick curtains, quiet voices, lawyers with decades of experience examining every word, every comma, every implication. Attention so sharp you could slice it. They begin reading. The first pages confirm what they already knew. Contradictions, editorial omissions, timeline inconsistencies. But then, midway through the declaration, a detail appears. A detail no one was prepared for. A name that wasn't Meghan, wasn't Harry, wasn't Oprah, wasn't a producer, wasn't a staff member. A name with connections, a name with influence, a name with political weight, a name that had absolutely no publicly known involvement in the Oprah interview. And suddenly everything changed. Because the presence of that name suggested that the narrative Meghan presented wasn't just emotional. It might have been strategic. That person, according to C17, played a role that was completely hidden from public view. What role? Let's break it down carefully, because this is where the story takes a sharp turn. According to the redacted declaration, this individual communicated with Oprah's team, provided contextual framing suggestions, advised on phrasing of sensitive topics, contributed to identifying questions that would maximize emotional resonance, and warned Oprah's producers that Meghan is prepared to be vulnerable. Lean into that. Lean into that. Think about that phrase. Lean into that. Not clarify, not probe, not verify, not challenge. Lean, which means Oprah's emotional reactions weren't spontaneous. They were encouraged, not fake, but guided. This revelation alone would have fueled global chaos if made public. But the redaction went deeper. Because C-17 didn't just mention this person's role. They included copies of actual communication, emails, voice notes, draft outlines, messaging suggestions, and one message stood out above all the others. A message that appeared in the sealed portion of the lawsuit. A message that read, "Keep this between us." This angle will land harder if Oprah reacts with concern instead of curiosity. Read that again. Concern instead of curiosity. That single instruction changes everything. Was the interview influenced by political or media power brokers? And no monarchy wants that question to become a headline. But the redaction didn't stop at identifying the person. It included something else. A transcript segment. A transcript from a private pre-interview discussion between Oprah's senior staff and this unnamed strategist. And in that transcript was a detail that sent shockwaves through the palace. The conversation referenced one of Meghan's key allegations. One of the explosive claims that defined the entire interview. But here's the twist. In this private conversation, the strategist expressed uncertainty about whether the allegation had happened exactly as Meghan remembered. Let me say that again for maximum impact. The strategist, a person advising Oprah's team on how to frame the narrative, privately admitted uncertainty about a core allegation. And yet, that allegation went forward unchallenged, unquestioned, amplified, broadcast around the world. That transcript excerpt was placed in the redacted section. Why? Because if it became public, it wouldn't just undermine Meghan's credibility. It would undermine Oprah's entire role. It would undermine the emotional foundation of the interview. It would call into question how and why certain narratives were allowed to stand. This was the palace's nuclear evidence. The kind of evidence that wins lawsuits instantly, but destroys relationships permanently. And that is why Charles redacted it. Some truths are too volatile to drop in the public square all at once. But let's not stop here. There was a final reason the redacted section was buried. Inside that sealed document, right below the transcript excerpt, was a single sentence handwritten by the palace legal team. A sentence fueled by years of royal restraint and quiet fury. It read, "This portion of evidence is withheld for now, pending further testimony." For now. Two words that change everything. Two words that tell us the palace is holding back. Waiting. Listening. Preparing. This lawsuit is not the end. It's the beginning. And the redacted section is not a secret. It's a warning. But what came next would change everything. Let me open with a question that is going to sit at the center of your mind for this entire chapter. What if the Oprah interview wasn't just between Meghan, Harry, and Oprah? What if there was a fourth person in the room? Not physically, but in influence, in decision-making, in narrative construction? Someone who didn't appear on camera. Someone who didn't sign a production contract. Someone who never wanted their involvement exposed. Someone whose fingerprints were all over the emotional and structural choices of the interview. And yet, almost no one outside a tiny circle even knows their name. Who was this mysterious third player? And why did Buckingham Palace consider their involvement explosive enough to justify redactions, secrecy, and a multi-year legal strategy? To answer that, let's walk backward into the shadows where this person operated. Because this is where the story becomes less about Meghan versus the monarchy, less about Oprah versus Charles, and more about influence, messaging, and invisible power. Before we name the role this person played, I want you to sit with a particular thought. Every major public moment has architects, political speeches, Hollywood scandals, royal announcements, celebrity interviews, documentary framing, media narratives. There are always individuals behind the scenes shaping tone, pace, context, and messaging. Sometimes they're PR managers, sometimes lawyers, sometimes political strategists, sometimes friends with access to powerful networks. Sometimes high-level communications specialists with an instinct for how public emotion can be guided. You know their work. You just never know their names. Now imagine one of these individuals inserting themselves into the creation of the most globally anticipated interview of 2021. Imagine them advising Oprah's team, advising Meghan, advising the direction of the narrative that would ultimately shape how millions perceive the royal family. Imagine them crafting the emotional beats of the interview, where the audience should gasp, where the audience should feel outrage, where viewers should feel sympathy, where Oprah should pause, raise an eyebrow, or let silence hang in the air like a suspended accusation. Now consider this. That person was not a member of the Oprah production staff, not a member of the Sussex team, not a palace insider, not someone connected to the media legally. So why were they there? Let's unravel this step by step. We know from the witness, C17, that this third player provided messaging advice, emotional framing suggestions, notes on how to phrase sensitive topics, counsel on timing and pacing, input on which claims would generate maximum cultural impact. This alone suggests expertise. But what kind of expertise? Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a political scandal unfold and noticed how certain phrases suddenly appear everywhere? Certain narratives become dominant. Certain perspectives overshadow nuance. That's messaging architecture. The third player in this story was a messaging architect, a strategist with experience influencing public opinion, not only in entertainment, but in politics, activism, media relations, and crisis management. They understood how to turn a personal grievance into a global conversation. And that is exactly what happened in the Oprah interview. Look closely. The interview wasn't just about racism. It wasn't just about mental health. It wasn't just about royal protocol or family dynamics. It became a symbol. It became a cultural moment. It became a political lightning rod. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone knows how to transform personal pain into public narrative. But where did this strategist come from? What was their connection to Meghan? Why did they have influence over Oprah's team? The answer lies in a relationship that predated the Oprah interview. This strategist had known Meghan for years, not as a friend, not as a confidant, but as a professional ally in advocacy networks. They crossed paths in philanthropic circles. They intersected during initiatives involving media representation, gender issues, or social justice advocacy. They admired Meghan's public persona long before the royal rift, and they believed her story had transformational potential. So when Meghan prepared for the Oprah interview, this strategist saw opportunity, a moment to shift global conversations, a moment to frame Meghan not just as a royal outsider, but as a cultural figure representing something bigger. And according to the witness, Meghan confided in this strategist, not about the intimate details of her marriage, but about her frustrations with the palace, her fears about public perception, her desire to finally tell the truth, her belief that this interview would define her legacy. The strategist encouraged her, advised her, motivated her, not because they wanted scandal, but because they believed Meghan's story had power. Let's be clear. This third player didn't tell Meghan what to say. They shaped what the public would hear. They shaped the emotional climate. They shaped the framing. They shaped the arc of empathy. And that is where things become dangerous. Because shaping narrative isn't illegal. But influencing the emotional direction of defamatory claims? That's something else. Now let's walk into the heart of the redacted evidence. The sealed filing indicated that the strategist communicated directly with Oprah's producers several times. Not in person, but via messages, emails, and briefing notes. These communications included requests for certain topics to be emphasized, suggestions that certain emotional beats needed space to breathe, direct advice, don't interrupt here, let Meghan talk until she's finished, guidance on when Oprah's reactions would heighten the gravity of the moment, recommendations for which revelations would resonate most in global media. This wasn't manipulation. It was orchestration. And that distinction is what makes this third player so critical to the lawsuit. Because if Oprah's team allowed outside messaging guidance before the interview, and if that messaging guidance contributed to the defamation of a monarch, then the interview ceases to be journalism. It becomes a coordinated messaging event. And now we arrive at the bombshell embedded deep inside the sealed evidence. C. 17 recorded a voice note from the strategist. A voice note that contained one sentence that detonated like dynamite in the legal team's hands. It said, "Make sure the phrasing leaves room for interpretation." That's how it lands emotionally. Read that again. Leaves room for interpretation. In legal terms, that's lethal. Because defamation relies on meaning, on what viewers believe the accusation implies. And according to the witness, the strategist was advising Meghan to express certain experiences in ways that sounded more ambiguous, more open-ended, more emotionally charged. Ambiguity is storytelling gold. Ambiguity lets the audience connect their own fears, biases, and assumptions. Ambiguity creates viral interpretation. But in a legal context, ambiguity is the foundation of defamation. And now we come to the moment that made the palace realize this strategist wasn't just an advisor. They were a liability. Right before the Oprah interview, Meghan reportedly asked the strategist, "Do you think people will understand what I mean?" To which the strategist replied, "They won't understand. They'll feel it. Feel it. Not process it. Not analyze it. Not question it. Feel it." And that is exactly what happened. Millions didn't watch that interview with their minds. They watched it with their emotions, which is why the allegations spread like wildfire. But what the strategist didn't anticipate was that emotional resonance can be legally dismantled if it turns out parts of the narrative were shaped without proper context. Which brings us to the final twist. See, 17 didn't just mention the strategist's involvement. They revealed something far bigger. This strategist had been advising Meghan long before the Oprah interview, advising her on media framing, advising her on public messaging, advising her during conflicts with palace staff, advising her on brand building, advising her on how to communicate emotional truth. This wasn't a one-time influence. This was a pattern. And once the palace connected those dots, everything pointed to one conclusion. Meghan didn't walk into the Oprah interview alone. She walked in with a narrative architect by her side, one who Oprah trusted, one who shaped the emotional interpretation of the interview, and one whose identity remains hidden behind redactions. But the most shocking part? This strategist wasn't the only unexpected figure involved in shaping the interview, because the very next piece of evidence, the one discovered immediately after analyzing the strategist's communications, revealed something no one in the palace expected: an email thread between Oprah's producer, Meghan, and someone even more influential than the strategist. Someone whose involvement raises the stakes of the lawsuit even higher. Someone whose name, when surfaced in sealed testimony, made the palace realize they weren't dealing with a simple interview anymore. They were dealing with a coordinated media operation. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What is the moment? The exact second, when a man who has endured scandal, humiliation, loss, betrayal, illness, and global scrutiny finally says, "Enough?" What does it take to push a king, a man trained from birth to endure storms silently, over the edge? Those are not rhetorical questions. They sit at the heart of this chapter. Because if there's one thing the world misunderstands about King Charles, it is this: he did not snap. He calculated. He did not lose control. He regained it. He did not react. He responded. And the breaking point wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the moment he realized silence was no longer noble. It was dangerous. Let's walk into that moment, slowly, carefully, and with the gravity it deserves. To understand why Charles finally filed his lawsuit, we must understand the pressure cooker he had been living in for 5 years. A king doesn't erupt suddenly. A king accumulates pressure until the load becomes unsustainable. Let's break down the layers of that pressure, one by one, until we reach the moment the dam cracked. Layer 1. The accusation that never left. The Oprah interview didn't fade with time. Most controversies do. They burn out, get replaced, get overshadowed. But this one didn't. It resurrected itself every few months like a ghost refusing to be exorcised. Whenever a new royal story hit the press, whether it was about Catherine, William, family dynamics, or Charles's health, the conversation always circled back to one thing. But remember what Meghan said. You know the line. The allegation that dominated the world's conversations. Concern over her baby's skin tone. For millions, it became gospel truth. And with every news cycle, the wound reopened. Every documentary, every think piece, every political debate about institutional racism, Every activist speech, every talk show panel, every late-night monologue. Charles was no longer controlling his own identity. His public image had been hijacked. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a human being with nuance, memories, or complexity. He was a symbol, and a negative one. That alone eroded him slowly. But that wasn't the breaking point. Layer 2, Harry's memoir. Spare dropped a bomb on the monarchy's reputation. But for Charles, it dropped something far more painful. A reminder that even his own son wouldn't defend him. Harry didn't explicitly confirm Meghan's claims. But he didn't deny them. He didn't correct them. He didn't clarify them. And his silence became consent in the court of public opinion. Charles wasn't just dealing with Meghan's accusation. He was dealing with Harry's refusal to counter it. Imagine your own child allowing the world to believe you're a racist without defending you. Would you remain silent? Layer 3, Catherine's illness. This is a detail often overlooked, yet crucial. When Catherine's health struggles became public, the monarchy found itself under unprecedented pressure. And during that period, the Oprah interview resurfaced again. Commentators dredged it up as part of the narrative about the royal family under stress or the monarchy's decline. Even Kate's private medical situation became entangled with allegations Meghan made years earlier. Charles watched the daughter-in-law he cared deeply for, a woman who had served the monarchy with extraordinary grace, get pulled into the Oprah narrative against her will. That hurt him deeply, but even that wasn't the breaking point. Layer 4, the political weaponization. This is where the story shifts from emotional to existential. Because in 2024 and early 2025, something dangerous started happening. Politicians began using the Oprah allegations in debates about monarchy reform, speeches in parliament, social commentary, university panels, international think tanks. The allegation was no longer a celebrity accusation. It was becoming historical record. At that moment, Charles understood something chilling. If he continued to stay silent, the Oprah interview would become an uncontested truth referenced in future textbooks, documentaries, and political discussions. Silence was no longer dignified. Silence was surrender. Layer 5, the witness testimony. When witness C-17 came forward with documents, recordings, and timelines proving inconsistencies in Meghan's claims and revealing Oprah's team's editorial choices, everything changed. The palace finally had factual evidence, a pattern of curated ambiguity, proof of omitted context, messaging influence from a third strategist, and contradictions in the emotional narrative of the interview. This didn't just weaken the allegation. It dismantled it. It transformed the accusation into something legally challengeable. This was the first time Charles saw a path to truth. Not just defense. But even this wasn't the breaking point. This was preparation. Layer 6, the document delivered at 5:47 p.m. Yes, down to the minute. Because that's when Charles's private secretary entered his study at Windsor Castle with a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope was a document that shattered the last piece of restraint Charles had been holding onto for 5 years. We know this document was provided directly by C-17. We know it included a transcript excerpt, communications involving Oprah's team, messaging suggestions that contradicted Meghan's statements, and evidence that one of Meghan's key claims had been dramatically altered for the interview. But there was one other thing in that envelope. A short message handwritten by the strategist described in Chapter 5. And this message was the moment everything changed for Charles. It read, "We can push this angle harder if Meghan sounds more certain. Ambiguity could weaken the impact." Let that sink in. For 5 years, Charles had lived under an accusation so severe it overshadowed his entire reign. And now he had evidence that someone advising Meghan and communicating with Oprah's team had suggested making her sound more certain about an allegation they themselves felt was ambiguous. More certain, stronger, sharper, more breaking news worthy. Charles realized something horrific. He hadn't been accused out of truth. He had been accused out of strategy. And that was the breaking point. Now imagine his emotional state in that moment. Decades of royal discipline. A lifetime of public scrutiny. A world defining him by an allegation he never made. His son pushing that narrative through silence. The monarchy he inherited facing a legitimacy crisis because of a televised moment engineered for emotional impact. His health. His wife. his daughter-in-law, his legacy, all overshadowed by a manipulated narrative crafted for maximum emotional explosion. How much can one man take? This isn't just courtroom logic anymore. This is human truth. Charles realized that remaining silent wasn't holding the monarchy together. It was letting it be dismantled piece by piece. And so, for the first time in his reign, Charles III made a decision not as a father, not as a husband, not as a grieving son, but as a king. He said, "No more." Layer 7, the quiet meeting. Hours after receiving that envelope, Charles summoned his senior legal advisors. What was supposed to be a 20-minute briefing turned into a 3-hour strategy session. And the most telling moment of that meeting? Charles's first words. After 5 years of silence, he spoke clearly, firmly, without hesitation. "Prepare the papers." Those 3 words marked the end of an era. Because when a king prepares legal papers and names Oprah Winfrey, the world shakes. But Charles wasn't done. Before the advisors left, he added one more instruction. Include everything, but hold back the nuclear evidence. This was not impulsive. This was chillingly strategic. Charles wanted the lawsuit public, but the most explosive evidence sealed. Why? Because he wasn't just filing a lawsuit. He was sending a message. To the world. To the media. To Harry. To Meghan. To Oprah. To that unnamed strategist. To the political bodies weaponizing the allegations.